everyone. We've got a special presentation today. We are doing 25-year member presentations. On behalf of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, we would like to honor the following realtors for dedication and involvement with NAR, CAR, and the local associations. The following members are being celebrated for dedicating 25 or more years of service in the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, commemorated with a congratulatory certificate and a 25-year pin. So, in no particular order, or perhaps there is and I'm just unaware of it, Mary Lehman with Keller Williams of Santa Barbara, Debbie Law with Diamond Properties, Jesus Flores with Century 21 Realty, William Tingle with Town and Country, Nancy Brannigan with Seascape, Dory Powell with Coastal Properties, Brenda Blaylock, Coldwell Banker Realty, Catherine Sweeney, Suncoast, Jim Turner, I know Jim from JT Real Estate Group, Val Oliver, Sotheby's International Realty, and personally proud, Michael Chenoweth from Radius Group Commercial Real Estate. Then we have Bernie Bernstein with Coastal Realty. Those are our 25-year members that are being celebrated today. So if we could all give them a big round of applause. I can't hear the hands, but I can see them, and that's wonderful. I know everyone's appreciative of their service, and we're appreciative of them. Thank you all for that. Now, moving on. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce Judy Egenolf, and I see her husband Rob in the background there as well. He's there. He's going to assist. Just a little background on Judy and Rob from Amherst. Judy began her career as a primary and secondary Montessori teacher, and Montessori holds a special place in my heart. She was a teacher trainer. And then she joined Rob in serving as a coordinator for First American Title Company before she and Rob in 1988 established Amherst Exchange Corporation with Judy at its helm. And over the years, she served as a qualified intermediary in thousands of exchange transactions nationwide, entrusted with proceeds in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm sure Rob helped too. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judy and Rob. Thank you so much for coming before us today and helping us out on 1031 exchanges.
Well, thank you for that intro, Brian. That just was very kind of you. We're both here, by the way, equally to talk with you this morning about the risk to tax deferred exchanges and what you can do to just help make exchanges a continuing real estate tool to defer taxes, because it helps the economy, it helps the market. Putting a chill on the market at this point just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And we don't believe that there's actually a ton of revenue for the IRS if they shut down exchanges or even limit exchanges. So we have some talking points for you that we're just going to start discussing. And if anyone has questions, we're happy to hear them at the end of the talking points.
Or if you use the chat feature, if there's something that's really relevant to what we're talking about, just put something up in the chat feature, and if we can, we will answer it at the time if it's appropriate. And
Great.
I just want to say, to point out that in 2017, when the Republicans controlled Congress and the White House, tax deferred exchanges were on the chopping block. Now it's 2021 and the Democrats control all of Congress and the White House, and 1031 exchanges are on the chopping block. So this isn't a party issue. This is a issue for raising revenue. And whenever you're talking about expenditures and tax cuts, you have to find a way to replace the revenue. And that's why they've been on the chopping block before. And that's why they're on the chopping block again now.
So getting to the talking points, what we have experienced over the many years of our practices is that it's last minute deal making that can kill anything. Everything is up for grabs. When you're spending as much money on infrastructure and other items, you need to find offsets. So even sacred cows can get thrown under the bus in the last 10 minutes if a bill is going to be held up without those offsets. So our job, again, is to keep our representatives very well appraised of what tax deferred exchanges contribute to our country. So I'm going to start with talking point number one.
Okay, well, maybe though, just one quick thing. Some of the issues that we're talking about were studied in two basic studies, which in the talking points that Judy will send later are the basis for coming up with a lot of the facts and information.
That is correct.
The Ernst & Young study and the
Ling and Petrova.
Ling and Petrova. And those were both funded by a coalition of real estate industry groups, including NAR. So NAR did fund those two studies, but so did the Federation of Exchange Accommodators, which is our trade organization. And they came up with some information and some studies, and that's really what we're basing a lot of our talking points on.
There are actually 16 organizations that came together to fund these studies. So they've been extremely helpful, and they're keeping up with current data. You're looking at what is happening in 2021 right now, which is, it's very meaningful to Congress to know what happens right now, not 10 years ago.
And one quick point, if you want to get either of those studies, the reports created as a result of those studies, we can send them to you, just let us know.
Actually, we have a whole handout prepared and we're sending it to Ani. She will distribute it to anyone who wants whatever we have. And I think really one of the major points is we want you to own the talking points. We're going to send it to you in Word as well as a PDF. You can put it on your own letterhead. You can reword. You can do what you need to do to speak to your sphere of influence. So point number one, exchanges are in common use throughout the country, primarily by small businesses and small scale real estate investors, not the very huge. I mean, they're in use by the very huge, but the vast majority of transactions, probably 75% of them, are small businesses and small investors. What do you have to say about that, Rob?
Well, yeah, absolutely they are. There's certainly some large ones as well too. And so the averages are high, but the median is around a $500,000 number.
500,000 to 600,000.
Something like that. Yeah, exactly. They've been around for 100 years. Exchanges came into the law a little over 100 years ago. So there's something that have been sort of a benchmark of the real estate industry since basically 1914, I think, when
Rob was here, by the way. So
I was just a tyke. I was just a tyke there, but I was around. And just another thing too, historically through our involvement in the world of exchanges, we've been involved with lobbying Congress. And back when it was first to be challenged back in the 70s and then the 80s, we actually got involved and did some lobbying in Congress, and we've been intimately involved ever since. So this is not something that's new and different. It's something that's been ongoing.
Okay, point two.
Point two.
Let's move it.
Well, they are, as you say, an ingrained feature in what's happened in the real estate world and mostly the commercial real estate world to entice investors to invest in real estate. And one thing we've also learned is that a healthy real estate market either portends or leads a healthy economy, and a unhealthy real estate market can lead or cause a problem with our overall economy. So it's a leading issue and it might be a causation issue. So we don't want to mess with the real estate market because overall that could really hurt our overall economic stability.
How many of you have actually experienced the fall of the real estate market taking the economy, the national economy, down? Have most of you seen that?
Yeah, you don't have to raise your hands. I think we all know that's been the history.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just repeat the talking point number 2 is that exchanges are a deeply ingrained feature of commercial real estate. So in other words, when you're investing in commercial real estate, you understand that you have flexibility with what you're buying. If it doesn't work out, you know you have an exit strategy. So we're talking about limiting that exit strategy as being dangerous. Point number 3, the repeal of exchanges would immediately lower property values and increase rental costs because the added tax burden on the investor has to be dealt with, has to be balanced out. So everyone gets hurt when 1031 exchanges are no longer available.
Now, the specific proposals on the table now don't include repeal of 1031. The one that is in Biden's proposal is to limit it to $500,000 worth of gain. We don't really know what that means. Is it $500,000 gain and you recognize the rest? Does it mean only a transaction where there's $500,000 gain or less? Does it mean one transaction of $500,000 or multiple transactions that are $500,000 each? We don't know what those limitations are, but I caution you in saying, as Judy pointed out, when you get to the, we'll call it the votorama, when they're talking about revenue sources, repeal is just as much a possibility as limitation on exchanges. So don't assume they're going to be around with a limitation. That is probably not a valid assumption. We don't think they're going to be repealed. Actually, I will say I don't think they're going to be limited, but right now, both possibilities are on the table. That's all. So,
okay, point 4.
Exchanges stimulate capital investment in property and reduce the lock-in effect of holding a property. What happens when you hold a property is you tend to get complacent with the property, but when someone new buys the property, they tend to invest more dollars in it and rejuvenate it. One of the things that's happening throughout the country right now is we have a lot of commercial property that's actually lying fallow or underproductive because malls are changing, the use of real property is changing, retail is changing in many parts of the country. So there's properties that don't necessarily meet the current market demand, and the present owners are reluctant or less motivated to invest in them. When a new buyer buys it through an exchange, they tend to revitalize it. In fact, the studies show that they are they tend to commit another, I don't know how much it is, some
couple hundred thousand
per property based upon the size of the property.
Right.
So it revitalizes the property itself. So it helps not only in turning the property over, but in creating a better market for use of that property in whatever the rental market is where it's located.
So I want to come back to lock-in effect. It literally lowers inventory, which then drives prices upward in that setting. So again, a chill on the real estate market. Approximately, and I'm going to say very approximately, based on the studies, 10 to 20% of all commercial real estate deals involve exchanges. The study was basically 2010 through mid 2020. So all of those years, but there were only 3 contributors to these studies. CoStar, Marcus Millichap, and IPX. You only have 3 major contributors. No one else was studied in these 2 studies by Ernst & Young and Ling and Petrova. So both feel that all of the percentages and values are much lower than the reality.
Okay. And I think another aspect of this is, and you probably have seen this as well as we have, a great number of transactions would simply not occur if they were not tax deferred. There are many people who would not dispose of their property if they couldn't do so without deferring the tax and buying another property. So while 10 to 20% might be exchanges, those transactions will, to a large extent, disappear if exchange treatment is not allowed.
I forgot to mention that not only were only 3 major suppliers of exchanges considered, someone in the transaction had to register or report that it was an exchange, or that exchange could not be included in the study. So there were a lot of limits to the study that make these numbers that we're now sharing with you lower than they should be.
Now, Brian has asked a question, which I think is relevant to this too. He said that he heard in 2015, the Senate Finance Committee report found that repealing the 1030 exchanges could result in a drop of annual GDP of over $8 billion. The only numbers we have are in the reports we're talking about, Brian, and I don't know what the specific numbers are. But remember that all of these numbers are created by the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and the basis for their determination of these numbers is a little bit elusive to me. And I think the numbers that the Ling and Petrova Act and the study and the Ernst & Young study come up with is significantly more accurate than what the CBO comes up with. So interesting question. I don't have a specific answer for you.
We don't have that number for sure. So,
and Gene Cedar has one. We will talk about that issue in just a second about real property taxes, because that's a very important issue.
Oh, we have good news for you there.
So go ahead.
No, you're next.
Okay. The next one is the median property value with the basis of the information they studied of all exchanges across the country was $600,000. Now that's the median and not an average. And the average would have been much higher because there's certainly many 20, 30, $50 million, $100 million properties that have been exchanged. But as far as numbers of transactions, the median was 600,000. So half of them were lower than that and half of them were higher than that. But what it really reinforces is Judy's point that these aren't just something used by huge major real estate investors. These are, I'll call them ma and pa investors who have an investment property, and they're the ones that would be most significantly impacted.
So relinquished properties, the properties being sold, were sold at a median price of $575,000, providing an interesting opportunity for first-time home buyers. So you have people exchanging out of properties to reconfigure their holdings and putting inventory into the market for first-time home buyers at these lower priced properties that are no longer producing, or they've been fully depreciated, or for whatever the reason. So I think it's great to consider that tax deferred exchange properties actually contribute to more people owning homes.
And on the corollary, and when buying the replacement properties, the average value of the replacement properties is significantly higher. In fact, 75% of the properties may be as much as $1.5 million, which means that those investors are exchanging out of one property into a more valuable property more often than not, which once again helps release the inventory of the cheaper properties, and it ends up acquiring other properties, which will then be substantially enhanced, rejuvenated, refurbished, and leased to the market to meet the leasing demands.
So based on a small study in California, basically half of all the California properties valued below $700,000 are rental houses or duplexes, and they provide affordable housing that would not be there if it hadn't been exchanged into and just sort of operated as a rental.
Which is one of the major problems in California is not having enough rental housing, and especially market rate or low market rate rental housing. And so this provides more opportunity for the growth in that specter. The other thing is, and we talked about, people buy these properties, renovate them, refurbish them, and that creates a lot of influx in capital, which supports building trades and associated real estate industry sectors, creating a whole lot of income that is otherwise would not be created. In other words, the turnover, the turning of these properties creates a great deal of other opportunity for income generating activities, like brokers, but like contractors, like designers.
I have that coming later. So take 11 too, because it goes with what you're saying.
Well, in fact, the studies indicate that it generates 568,000 jobs per year, which translates to $27.5 billion worth of labor income and over $55 billion to the U.S. economy annually. So the existence of exchange properties creates a tremendous cash revenue source to the government in the way of taxes. It churns dollars in local communities, which is always good for its local economy. And those numbers are substantial at $55 billion to add to the US economy just because exchanges exist. That's not the exchange properties, it's the ancillary stuff that's created because of exchanges.
And the Ernst & Young study, as I mentioned, really both studies point this out, but Ernst & Young feels that this 568,000 jobs is highly underestimated, and that it's most likely over 69,000 jobs. 600.
So 69 billion and 710,000 new jobs.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Rob.
The numbers are hard to read.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to look down.
Right.
So in any case, what we're looking at is that these new jobs are everything from contractors, skilled and unskilled blue collar workers, lenders, title insurers, escrow companies, realtors, appraisers, engineers, qualified intermediaries, surveyors, building material suppliers. And when you look
and attorneys,
and oh, don't forget the attorneys.
right?
So it's a huge ripple across quite a number of sectors. When you really want to list it, you hardly can stop making a list. It goes everywhere. Sewers, appraisers. Did I say appraisers? Okay. So in California, an average of $6 billion per year of additional income taxes are paid due to foregone depreciation. So a reduced deduction on the replacement property in 1031s.
Now, if you think about it, the problem there is you don't get a step up in basis. If you bought it, you'd be able to depreciate from your cost basis. When you exchange, you get a carryover basis, your basis in the old property. So you don't get to depreciate from the market value of the property. You get to depreciate it from your basis in the property. And those depreciation deductions that aren't available can amount to $6 billion. But the ancillary part of this also is that local taxes, and this is answering Gene Cedar's question, right, real property taxes do definitely increase, and that number is about $7.8 billion. So every time a transaction occurs, there's a reappraisal of the property for property tax purposes in California anyway. And so those properties get reappraised to the market value. Even though you carry over your basis for income tax purposes, the property tax basis goes up to market value. And so those property taxes are a huge generation of money that goes back into the community, because the property taxes go back into the local communities. And then there's the state income taxes and state and local taxes, the transfer taxes. There's a whole series of taxes that are available, and the studies show that's about $7.8 billion.
Right, and it's about 5.7 federal and about 3 billion in state and local.
Right.
So
now, Randy asked a question. He's been in real estate for 40 years, probably at least 40 years, Randy, probably more than that, I would guess. No, I'm teasing. And what makes this any different than the last few times over the years, the 40 years they've been trying to get rid of 1031 exchanges? I don't know that it's actually different, but I think there's a different view towards sacred cows in Washington right now. There in 2017, there was such a motivation to lower taxes. That was really the driving force behind the Republican Congress and the White House. And they didn't care what they gave up to lower taxes, because they made a political commitment to lower taxes. Now we have the Democrats in Congress, and they've made a political commitment to make taxes more fair, to pay for infrastructure. And so they have those as their priorities. And the items, the sacred cows in taxation, are really more at risk now than I think before. So actually, Randy, to answer your question, I think in the last few years, it's been more at risk than any time during my career, which is more than 40 years, I will say. But it always has been a potential issue that we'd lose exchanges. So, but I think it might be a little more at risk right now. That's all.
I want to say that both parties before this election listed 1031s as a consideration for repeal. So for the first time in our working history, both parties, no matter who won, exchanges were going to be on the chopping block. And it really, that's what activated all these groups to fund all the studies over the last few years.
And
We knew it was a fight, no
Right.
matter what.
And the issue is you have to have the studies done. So when it comes up, even if it's the last minute, you can respond. And so what the industry organizations have done is, instead of just waiting to respond, they've tried to educate the congressional members in their local area, the senators in each state, to try and get them up to speed. And by the way, when you talk to these people, you talk to their tax advisors, you rarely talk to the elected official themselves because they rely upon their tax advisors. But there's been a concerted lobbying effort by NAR, by the FEA, by all these other trade organizations to undermine the desire to address 1031 exchanges before it even comes up. And I will say what happened in the vote-a-rama on Monday night, as you probably know if you're following what's happening in Congress, they passed the infrastructure bill on Monday, and then they had what's called a vote-a-rama on the budget reconciliation bill, and Tuesday passed that. But overnight, there were many, many amendments to the reconciliation bill. And one of them that was proposed was to not make any change to 1031, which passed by a voice vote in the Senate. We don't know what the numbers were,
Right.
but it would pass by a voice vote, which isn't binding, doesn't mean much because it now goes to the House and the House makes its own determination. And then it goes back to the Joint Committee to determine the language. But they did pass by a voice vote an amendment that says we won't change 1031 exchanges. And another thing not connected with 1031 is they also addressed the step up in basis, which is a critical aspect in real estate as well too. And by a vote of 99-0, they agreed they would not eliminate the step up in basis on death in real estate, or actually not in real estate, in farms, in businesses, and in ranches. But that still is a good indication they don't want to eliminate the step up in basis. Neither of those are binding, can't count on any of those. Things will still happen, but I think it's a good sign. There's a question from Gene Cedar. Do other countries have similar programs like 1031 exchanges? The answer is no. To our knowledge, no other country has something similar to 1031. In fact, Judy has done exchanges throughout the world, and local taxes are often an issue because you don't get the same deferral. But US taxpayers can be subject to local taxes as well as US taxation.
Correct. And they are. That's what occurs. We just were working on a transaction in Canada, and Canada forces the attorney of the taxpayer to withhold 25% of the gross selling price for 3 to 4 months while they have a chance to study the transaction to decide what their tax will be. It makes an exchange almost impossible. Not quite, but almost. It's very difficult.
So to my knowledge, there is no other country that has a program similar to 1031. And 1031 was adopted in the US taxation code in 1914, I believe it was, because there were barters back then, and it was really a barter. And it's really, if you barter this and get that, why should it be taxed if you're not getting any cash? And that was the theory of allowing these transactions to proceed. And of course, it's changed a lot since then. It changed with Starker and delayed exchanges in the 70s. And so it's always been sort of a fluid thing, but it's always been with real estate, and it has always made real estate one of the most attractive investments because you can restructure your real estate holdings without having to pay a tax. And having that exit strategy has always really been a great incentive.
So those are the major points.
Diana has a comment, which I think is a good one. It doesn't matter what personal political party you're involved with, doesn't matter your personal political choices. Right. This is a real estate issue, and it's the voice of the real estate industry that we're talking about. And it is a unified real estate industry, not just NAR, not just FEA, but a huge real estate industry that has done these studies and is taking this position. And that's a really good point. It's not a partisan issue. Absolutely. It is a real estate issue, and we have to be clear in that when we talk about this. Good point, Diana.
Yes.
So, and that's really what we have. Judy, you have anything more?
Well, I'm just going to say that we're going to provide a well-organized handout listing the points, listing the background with the studies. We can send you the full studies. Depends on how deep a dive you want to make here. But the most important thing is to keep talking about it. Talk about it with your friends. They may know someone that you don't know they know, or it's just keeping the word out that is so important, keeping the pressure on between now and the passage of this major bill.
And we have communicated with our Congressman Salud Carbajal. I would encourage you to do the same and do what Brian did. You wrote a great letter a couple of weeks ago, Brian, which I thought addressed all these issues very well. That's the kind of thing we need to see out there, and telling everybody, informing everybody. The optics of this are that it's something that is for the ultra rich and it's a loophole, and that's just not the case. We have to change the optics, and your letter was great for doing that, Brian.
That's all we have. Any other questions? Thank you so much for having us.
Rob, Judy, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. It's a very illuminating, very edifying, and very important, as you very clearly, made it the impact on our economy at a local and a state and a national level would be greatly impacted if 1031s did go away. And given that the vast majority of 1031s are from mom and pop investors, these are our clients, these are our members, and this is something that's really important for us to protect. So thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and if there's no other questions for Rob or for Judy, we will let everyone go just a little bit early today, unless Ani, you need me to do anything else?
Nope.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Oh wait, Jean, I see in chat you had a question. Is there any pork belly attached to this bill, or is it just 1031?
The question is, which bill are you talking about? I mean, certainly in the infrastructure bill, there's a whole lot of pork belly real in there. Everybody has their pet projects they want to get funded. In the reconciliation bill, there will also be. Remember that Congress allowed what's it called, when they tap their favorite projects, they worked on for a while, and oh, I forget the name. It escapes me. My age is coming in. But when they have their favorite projects they want to attach to a bill, they allow those now. So all of the senators and all the congressmen are attaching their favorite local projects, and that's how they're going to get their local constituency to approve their position on these bills. So yes, there's pork belly in the infrastructure. Yes, there's pork belly in reconciliation. And the offsets are what we're talking about. And the offsets are the revenue generating things like 1031 exchanges.
Yep. Yeah. And it's going to look a whole lot different if it even makes it back to the floor of the Senate. Yes. This will change drastically and dramatically over time if it gets further along. So there's a lot to pay attention to moving forward.